Does anyone have an unpopular opinion? Dave, have you got one, please?
Do I have an unpopular opinion? Well, I've given you 11.
Bandwidth for changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode cloud servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. Do not underestimate the power of the independent open cloud for developers. Yes, I'm talking about Linode. Linode is our cloud of choice, and it's the home of changelog.com. What we love most about Linode is their independence and their commitment to open cloud. Open cloud means being unencumbered by outside investment and maximizing value for the community, not shareholders. And that's exactly what Linode represents. No vendor lock-in, open at every layer. If you want to learn more, head to linode.com/open. Again, linode.com/open.
Let's do it. It's go time.
Welcome to Go Time, your source for diverse discussions from around the Go community. If this is your first listen, be sure to subscribe at changelog.com/GoTime or your favorite podcast directory. Next week's episode is all about working from home, a topic that is on our minds here at Changelog and likely relevant to you as well. Subscribe to be notified when it drops. Okay, here we go.
Hello and welcome to Go Time. I'm Matt Ryer. Today we're talking about the Zen of Go. On today's show we have Johnny Borsico, Carmenando, and the one and only Dave Cheney. Hello everybody.
Hello.
Hello, friends.
How's it going, Dave?
It's going well. How's everybody doing in Radioland?
Yeah, not bad. Carmen, it's been a while since you've been on actually, isn't it?
I know. I've missed you all. It's nice to be back.
Yeah, we've missed you. I was about to say that.
Dave is fave. I didn't come back for you. I came back for Dave. Sorry.
None taken. None taken. Johnny, how are you, mate?
I'm doing well. Not too bad.
What's been going on?
Not much. Just
cracking on.
Yeah. Just trying to be nice to everybody. Unlike you, I think.
That's hard work.
Yeah.
It's too hard.
From what you've told me, yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
So this show then's called the Zen of Go. And Dave, I wonder if you could just kick us off and tell us, what does that actually mean? Where does this come from?
Okay. Well, first things first, I have to give credit where credit is due. In fact, and the ideas for the Zen of Go came from many places, including here in Go Time. When I think the last time when I spoke, when we were talking about try, one of the things that Peter Bergon said, and maybe for him it was just a throwaway comment, but for me, like I really grabbed on and latched to it, was when he was talking about error handling should be explicit. And he said, this should be a core value of the language. We should write it down. We should make this explicit. And so that was one of the ideas. Some of the other ideas in some of the other extended discussion about try, and this isn't all about error handling, was Danielle Petrizlak said, like other languages have core values, and she kind of pointed to the Zen of Python. And so that was like what had kind of got me percolating for a year. And then a couple of months ago, I was lucky enough to be invited to go to the second GopherCon in Israel. And they said, you have an hour? And I was thinking, well, what have I got that would fill an hour? And so very much the talk that came out of it and the ideas that came out of it are kind of an hour's worth of ideas. So as well as recognizing these are really kind of not my ideas, these are just kind of things that I've pulled together, I also need to apologize for everyone having to read an hour's worth of text. That's the reason why that document is so long, because like if they'd give me 30 minutes, it would have been much shorter.
That's great. There is a kind of mini site though, isn't there, as well, where you've written out kind of a set of these rules or these points. How can we find that?
At the bottom, it's also, I guess we'll put it in some show notes, but it's the zenofgo.netlify.com. The main reason I do that, and this is perhaps a little kind of presentation inside judo, is when I'm giving feedback to people with their presentations, I always say, look, I have a superpower. I can control what people in the audience are thinking. And the way that I do that is I put the words really big behind me. So if I want them to think something, I write those words. Like if I want a very important thing out of a sentence or a paragraph to be the key message, I put that behind me in a 1,000,000-point font.
Dave, I'm going to write this down. I've been doing my talks wrong,
Yeah.
for sure.
Total Jedi mind trick right there.
Also, if you want people to quote you well on Twitter, like with a photo, make sure that the words that you want them to repeat are behind you.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I tried that, but it was a Dave Cheney quote. So the picture is of me and a Dave Cheney quote behind me. Just sorry.
I do that sometimes, and then there's not enough space to fit the credit on, so I just take that off.
And just take credit yourself.
Wow. It's default, isn't it? I can't help it. That's the default value of that.
Even the zenofgo.net, lefy.com, or the-zen-of-go.net. I actually quite like the blog post better because I don't mind reading an hour's worth of text. I found it quite enjoyable, all of it.
It's more contextual, yeah.
So part of it was like to have something snappy to take away. Like one thing you always do in marketing on a trade show is make sure you give somebody something with your name on it. So when it's on their desk, they look down, they're like, oh, I remember that. So part of the little mini site was a thing to give to the audience to take away. And there's always a tension between like a 6,000 word blog post and people who don't have the time to read the whole way through. So I think there's kind of a notion of giving them like something more concise. Again, to like give props to all the inspirations. Rob Pike's Go of Proverbs was another big inspiration there. And maybe we'll get into this later. I have this notion that the Proverbs are kind of like advanced level. Maybe, because kind of part of the idea of like Proverbs in both the way that Pike said them and the original Game of Go inspired ones was that they were kind of like these little kind of whimsical observations, which kind of make sense when you're like, oh, now I understand the carpenter's square makes co. But is that really useful for someone who's never seen the game before? So that's why each of them comes with at least a little paragraph to describe them, because ideally, this is kind of my take on it, that they should be usable, especially by novices, because this kind of comes back to my whole kind of rant about idiomatic Go actually being quite an exclusionary term. So I didn't want them to be kind of vague in that way that you could, have a long stand-up argument about it in the way that the Zen of Python is actually it was a thought device to kind of prompt people in the Python community to really say, well, hang on, that doesn't seem to be how I'm actually writing Python. Tim Peters was obviously being like, haha, that's the trick.
Yeah, you're right. The titles of each little point are quite poetic, so it does leave a lot of room for interpretation. They aren't code, are they? So yeah, I think I appreciate that. And it's a good point to make. And I think I've seen this actually happen where someone will give a talk and they'll kind of skip over some of the fundamentals just to kind of get to the higher level ideas. And then somebody that perhaps didn't have those fundamentals, their experience of it is then very different. And I've seen that happen a couple of times. So I think that is a thing that we have to look out for. But the little descriptions on the site, I think for sure help that.
So to give some background, like in a growing community, like in Go's growing community, which we all hope it is, most of the people joining this community will have joined recently. We know like this is kind of makes sense mathematically. It also kind of makes sense anecdotally. Like if you think of all the conferences you go to, you, like as the MC or someone, you might do a show of hands of like who's been here a long time, who's their first time here. The majority of the people at conferences, at meetups, are newcomers. So we should optimize for the newcomer rather than over focusing on the old hands who've been here a long time.
Yeah, I think that's a nice decision if you have to make that decision, because the thing about the people with more experience is they have more experience. And so they are more kind of equipped to be able to find the right information and things like this. I do feel like whenever I give a talk, I always try and give it to someone that's new. I always want to make sure they're at least covered. That's why sometimes, even on this show, I sound like an idiot. It's not because I am one. It's because I'm being nice.
Well, you mentioned new, and I think one of the beautiful phrases for making sure that you have that perspective is Zen mind, beginner mind, which is why I love the title of your talk and of the blog. And so when someone has never heard of, well, what is Zen mind, beginner mind? It says, in the beginner's mind, the options are many. In the master's mind, the options are few. And so sometimes the proverbs that Rob has, the brevity and the wit comes from layers and layers and layers of meaning. And so when you get it, that is the delight of those proverbs. But it also is exclusionary to those who haven't yet gotten there. So I'm glad that you did this and made it more explicit.
So I'd like to perhaps briefly touch on sort of the fact that you consider sort of the term idiomatic, right, go to be exclusionary in some way. I kind of take a slightly different view of it in the sense that I think it's an aspirational goal almost, right? So when you join a community, there is going to be an idiomatic way of writing it, be it, Go, Rust, or Ruby, or whatever, right? So like you want to fit in, right, in a way, and to write the, programs like most others are doing, at least in the correct way most others are doing. So to me, it's sort of it's an aspirational, less so an exclusionary term, but I can definitely see where you're coming from when you say that. To me, when I juxtapose the Go proverbs and the Zen of Go, I see sort of the Zen of Go as something that you understand and sort of take to heart on your way to the Go proverbs, right? Once you reach the Go proverbs, you're like, oh, okay, now so much starts to make sense because you've been working with Go for a little while. You sort of understand sort of the layered meaning in the proverbs. The Zen of Go is more explicit. It's deliberately sort of an explanation, right, of how you should approach sort of your Go work. So I see sort of writing idiomatic Go as sort of the aspirational, something that everybody should be striving to do. Not necessarily sort of shutting the door on folks who don't quite know how to do it, or whether they know if they're sort of, if they're doing it right.
Yeah, I think you touched on my key kind of uncomfortableness with this idea of idiomatic Go. It is not that we shouldn't be writing code in the idiomatic style, but actually the word idiom itself. Like I went to the dictionary, and the definition of idiom is the way that we do things around here. It's really the accepted norm. And in any kind of culture that has that, this is the way that we do things around there, it can be groupthink. We write code like this because we write code like this. Now, the reason that I said idiomatic Go can be exclusionary is not the ideas of, we should write good code in the style that we've all become accustomed to. It's the way that's actually administered. Scott Myers, the C++, effective C++ author, has this amazing blog post on writing effective C++ books. He's, he totally breaks the fourth wall about how he went about writing the effective C++ books. And the thing that I took away from that is, well, first of all, avoid absolutes. Like you have titles, like you shouldn't say always and never, but say prefer or avoid. So first of all, moving away from absolutist language is important there. And the second one was that in my observations, and I really want to ask the rest of the group how they perceive it, most of the times when the word idiomatic Go has been used, it is usually with a negation in front of it. That's not idiomatic. You did that wrong. And that's the key thing which I'm concerned about idiomatic Go as a teaching tool.
Good point.
Does that seem fair? Like when you've seen idiomatic Go used as a justification or as a goal, I've generally found it's very close on the page with words that imply that the thing that the person did is not idiomatic. It is not in the tribe. It is not following the accepted standard. They did it wrong.
Yeah, it somehow encodes a suggestion of naivety or something, doesn't it? Somehow in that criticism, yeah. And we don't need to do it. You can probably get the same ideas across without resorting to that, which kind of makes sense. I mean, sometimes, I found that it's sometimes useful to follow patterns that other people are doing, even if I don't quite understand why they exist. And then I can sort of learn later. I find that happens too. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's sometimes I think if you expect everyone to learn everything straight away, it is a lot to learn. I mean, we do try and sometimes we say like, oh, it's easy, or, that's a mistake. This stuff is not easy at all. In fact, it probably wouldn't interest us if it was that easy. So yeah, I feel like if you expect people to know everything too quickly, it can really put people off. So I like the idea that people can follow these ideas around, even if they don't have a full grasp of their sort of deep textured meaning, but can still be a good shortcut for people.
To come back to your point, the concern I have with idiomatic Go is that everybody is well-meaning. It's just that the way that I've generally seen it expressed in code reviews, in comments online, is it's always with that, this is, the thing that you did is not idiomatic. And what struck me was that feedback, that negative feedback, right at the point when the person is most excited about Try and Go, most interested in investing in it, most interested. So this whole exercise was really a question of how can we reframe that commentary or that feedback to be just in the positive frame, so nobody has to hear, don't do it like that, do it like this. And to go back to Maya's work, rather than saying, never use some of the millions of obscure features in C++, make a suggestion that is, do this. If you have a world of choices, start with this one. So that was really how I wanted to reframe it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Getting to the heart of what idioms are for in programming. So many ways for the code to compile, but in order for understandability to increase, in order for the code to grow well, age well, be able to be refactored, we have to layer this shared meaning on top, which is idiomatic Go. So what I'm hearing is when you say, when we use no, that's not idiomatic, there are certain contexts for which that might be okay if the person is already at a certain level of understanding of Go. But we should also be very explicit in saying the reason why we like idiomatic Go is because it helps us later on for X, Y, Z, right? So, and I just love that we're even talking about this because this transcends just Go to any programming language, right?
I like that idea that you just brought up, which is kind of, instead of saying, oh, this is rejected because it's not idiomatic, you could say this, even if you don't say idiomatic, this is a way to do this. And it's a sort of teaching opportunity, isn't it? Which we don't always feel like we have time for, but sometimes it can be just a different way of framing what the same thing you were going to say before. And suddenly you have been able to it's a positive, like you say, Dave, it's a positive experience then instead of a negative one.
Precisely. Like to take my favorite one, which is, don't start. Problematic to not use a negation in there. When you start a Go routine, always know when it will finish. Is a much better way of saying that. Imagine if you hyperlink that in a code review. Like thumbs down, hyperlink to something that says, when you start a Go routine, always know when we finish, is much better than someone writing, hey, you've got a leak there.
Mm.
Yeah, and the latter is, or being able to describe it by saying, here are the consequences all the way through the way that the data transforms, shows a level of understanding and awareness. But I often have caught people who say that's not idiomatic Go with just kind of cargo culting and not knowing why. And so I love that if you're ready to give a constructive criticism to somebody or some feedback for let's do it this way, I would love that whoever is doing that feedback, be able to give some time to be able to talk about why that is. And that's hard to do. And I think when we are asked to do that on the spot, very few people can actually do it. So we kind of then default back to, oh, that's not idiomatic, without understanding why.
I was going to ask you at some point which one was your sort of a favorite of these sayings, and you sort of mentioned that before. One thing I've noticed of the set, right? Most of them, at least 8 of them, are very explicit. You can literally, read it and you know exactly what it's telling you to do or to avoid, right? At least 2 of those, maybe 3, can be interpreted more sort of subjectively, right? So I'm thinking of perhaps the most abstract one is moderation, right? Moderation is a virtue. So, and obviously in my mind, I see moderation as a virtue as sort of the topmost sort of abstract one, the one that kind of requires a bit more experience, like, having seen a few things to kind of know where the right, what's the right amount, quantity is, right? And then obviously maintainability, which, different people will have different ideas of what maintainability means, right? And then the third one in my mind is sort of each package fulfills a single purpose, right? So again, these 3, there's, depending on who you're talking to, the teams you're in, these things are going to mean different things to different folks. I'm wondering, like, what is the tool that you would employ, right? Especially for the first one, especially for the moderation part, right? What is a tool that you personally employ to know how far is too far or how much is just right?
Yeah, an excellent question. And I need to give some editorial context here. I started with to talk about public speaking. I'm sure everyone's been through that wave where you're like, this sounds like a great idea. I'm going to propose this as a conference talk. And then even better, you get accepted and you're elated. You're like, this is fabulous. And then you making some notes, and you go and drink some coffee, and you write in your book for a little bit, and then in about a month you come back and you say, right, time's ticking, I've got to go and write that talk. And you sit down and write it, and you're like, crap, this idea is not as good as I thought it was. This isn't going to work out as well as I thought it was. I've made a terrible mistake. This is a process that I go through for every talk that I write. And then it's a process of like pulling yourself out and say, well, okay, what you promised to do this talk for this on this subject. You probably missed the point to change your topic, so you just got to grin and bear it. From talking to other speakers, I think this is actually a very common thing that happens to everybody. So to break the fourth wall a little bit, as I got into it, I ran out of similarities I could find between the Zen of Python and a potential Zen of Go. The talk, I thought there was going to be a lot of crossover, but I actually found that I had to reinterpret what Peters wrote quite heavily in some points. And towards the end of the talk, I said, look, I've mined as much as I can from this. I mean, they're fundamentally different languages, although Go is roughly 30% Python anyway, if you look at its lineage. To that, some of those points are, worked really well with the material. Others were a bit of a stretch. Some just have no lineage at all. So to come here, moderation is a virtue. Like, there are some in there that I felt had to be said, like simplicity. We cannot talk about with Go without saying simplicity. Simplicity is a core value. And if this is a list of things that Go programmers as a tribe, as a group, hold dear, simplicity has got to be in there. So no matter how kind of hand wavy and hard to say that the final conclusion is, you've got to say, is that simple? Like if it's not, and that's totally subjective. Moderation is a virtue. I thought about that one a lot. I thought about my own experiences a lot, that when I came to Go, I was very excited about the things in Go that were different from the languages I was using before. Lightweight concurrency, the fact that it was compiled, that was great compared to JVM languages. And so those things that were unique about Go, I wanted to use all of them. Concurrency for everything, channels for everything, everything's going to be in its own Go routine. Like, there's a reason these special features in the language, so there's a reason, so therefore I should use them, was the theory that I had. And again, I don't think this is uncommon. Like in another point, I wrote that, Go is reasonably performant, so people will use it for the things that it's for. That Go has good concurrency support, so the programs that be written in it will use concurrency heavily. So we can't deny that the things which are done well in the language will be the things that people want to use. And so there's a tension there between, well, I want to use all, this kind of novice thing of I want to use all the features. They're there for a reason. I should use them. And the realization, which I think each of us has gone through in our journey through learning Go, becoming proficient in realizing that, just as in life, overuse of any one of those things just leads to code that is either hard to read, not maintainable, or fundamentally just kind of too clever for what it's doing. That was certainly my experience when I went overboard with Go routines. Like, I broke the program into tiny little pieces and then missed the bigger point that actually they were all waiting on each other. So it was fundamentally sequential, but I just made it harder to follow. For anyone who had to, one of the first big pieces of code that I contributed to the Go project was working with Adam Langley on the SSH package. And that initially had channels for everything. Every possible thing that, like, every message, like SSH is kind of a stacked protocol. So at every level, they communicated through channels. And again, very complicated, as well as tracking the ownership of those channels, closing them, all that stuff. Fundamentally missed the point that this is a stacked protocol. Well, nothing happens at the higher level until something's happened at the lower level. So those are just function calls. At the end of moderation is a virtue, I was left with this unsatisfactory kind of thing of saying, do you feel that you've done the least you could, which was really the answer. Have you used the features in Go in the least? To point to maybe some guidance here, does everyone remember the blog post a couple of years ago called Choose Boring Technology? This is this idea of innovation tokens. Has everyone heard of innovation tokens? Yep.
But maybe some of our listeners won't have, so maybe we could, for their benefit.
Sure.
We'll definitely put it in the show notes. But the idea of innovation tokens is that every time you start a new project, you bring with you all the knowledge that you had. Say you're doing a new web application. Well, you're going to pretty much start from the old web application, and maybe you'll change a few things. Like maybe you'll be like, "Ooh, that database that was a poor choice." Or for this, I think we need a different kind of database. But in then taking on something new, like changing your database, you've spent one of your innovation tokens. You've taken on a big risk because that's an unknown. The main push of this Choose Boring Technology blog post was, you don't have unlimited innovation tokens. You have 2, maybe 3, more like 1. So if you're thinking about, trying to apply moderation as a virtue to your Go code, say, well, this code sure does use a lot of concurrency. Maybe that's the one innovation token. If you're using a lot of Go routines to kind of break up this problem, then maybe we shouldn't, going to think up something hypothetical, maybe we shouldn't have a lot of complicated data structures as well. It's really about recognizing, I've used a lot of a certain part of Go. The goal is not to use all of the parts at the same time. That's kind of, I've pushed my stack in on that one idea.
Yeah, so it's sort of taking that minimalism a little bit further as well into the choices that you make about stuff. It's interesting because, we're at risk of that kind of thing is at risk of becoming one of those headlines like, don't use channels. That could easily fall into that same trap. And the thing is, I'll admit, I have overindulged on channels in the past, and you actually end up tying myself in such knots, and sometimes very literally, not literally. And so, but that learning process I found to be probably quite valuable. So I wouldn't necessarily want to deprive anyone of that. You're dead right. On a real team, in a real job, in a real situation, of course, there's limits. There's only so much you can do. And I like that idea of sort of having don't overindulge on something, having a healthy kind of use of these things. It's kind of a nice idea.
I'll give you another example of where something could be overused. In my first talk at .go, I wanted to talk about Rob Pike's functional option pattern and how I applied it in the design of some code that I was working on. 2 years later, a number of people had said to me, look, I really love that talk, but I'm not sure that the other people, I can propose these ideas. Like, it's too weird. Like this idea of anonymous functions that return anonymous functions, it's too weird. And that was kind of the impetus for another talk about, hey, free functions are a thing, we should use them. But it's a realization that is probably like, if everything in your code base is functions that return functions that call functions, that's a really big innovation token. Mixing that with like heavy channel use and then heavy Go routine use, that's a pretty kind of pro level move. That's, that would be one of those cases where you'd say, well, you seem to have used all the you seem to have used all the features of the language. Is that going to be a little bit hard to follow?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you use all of the 25 Go keywords in a program, I reckon you probably are.
How often do you think about internal tooling? I'm talking about the back office apps, the tool the customer service team uses to access your databases, the S3 uploader you built last year for the marketing team, that quick Firebase admin panel that lets you monitor key KPIs, and maybe even the tool that your data science team had together so they can provide custom ad spend insights. Literally every line of business relies upon internal tooling, but if I'm being honest, I don't know many engineers out there who enjoy building internal tools, let alone getting them excited about maintaining or even supporting them. And this is where Retool comes in. Companies like DoorDash, Brex, Plaid, and even Amazon, they use Retool to build internal tooling super fast. Retool gives you a point, click, drag and drop interface that makes it super simple to build these types of interfaces in hours, not days. Retool connects to any database or API. For example, to pull data from Postgres, just write a SQL query and drag and drop a table onto the canvas. And if you want to search across those fields, add a search input bar and update your query, save it, share it. It's too easy. Learn more and try it free at retool.com/changelog. Again, retool.com/changelog.
There was a recent post about like the 6 stages or the stages of a Go programmer, and it was the evolution in a small, quippy like GitHub gist, which is basically this: you start out simple, but now I want to use all the features, and then you realize over time you go back to the very beginning where you started, and then there was like another like cheeky Rob Pike homage without syntax highlighting or something. But I think again, it's not just programming or even Go; it's human nature that we want to be able to try to be clever. I mean, there's a reason why the word sophomoric exists, right? Oh, that's so sophomoric. It's when we're just starting to master a thing, but we're overdoing it, we're overcooking it. And you start to see time and time again, when you look at the masters, they have, I think there's the reason why the simplicity matters, or simplicity is complicated, from a person who's had to go through the hard knocks, or some of the quotes that we hear time and again from like Brian Kernighan, like if you are not smart enough to debug the code when you write it, you won't be able to debug it later. So this is all part of the journey, and it's just like there's just no way through it or a fast way through it. Like you have to let the learners just, abuse some of these features and then come out the other end. Like I feel like it's like Dante's Inferno. Like you just got to go through that hell, go descend deeper and deeper and deeper, and then you'll come back out the other end. You'll be fine.
So can I ask a question of the group? Have you joined like a project like this? Could be joining a new company, or just moving between team, or just being assigned to a new project, and you thought, this code, I need to rewrite this. This is going to work great on radio, but like show of hands, who's done that? let the record show that I'm raising my hand. Johnny put his hand back down.
I just felt, you know what? I internalized it like the imposter syndrome. Like maybe I'm not that good after all. Like maybe it's me, right? I didn't have the courage to be able to like sort of spread my elbows and have the confidence that what I knew was probably a good way, or equally good way.
Yeah, it definitely happened more for me in languages where there were more choices to be made. Having Go to do all of that for us and take that decision away.
Oh, okay. So formatting.
Yeah, so sometimes I think even just stylistically, but not just the style, but even like if it's an OO programming language, the class hierarchies. There's lots of different ways to slice that, and sometimes you'd think, there's a kind of clear abstraction here, and there's a few weird abstractions that you can tell have got dust on them now. And yeah, of course, you just think now this could be written so much better. That is what we always think, isn't it?
The reason why I raised my hand sort of sheepishly was because I was like
coward.
I've done.
Oh, we'll cut that out. For sure.
I realize I've done this. So you do this enough time in projects, you realize sort of the ego that you're bringing to a project, right? Like you're it's almost like you're dismissing like months or years worth of people's hard work and effort, and requirements are never clear the first time around, right? So there's so much you don't know, right, about a project before, and then here you are, you just show up and then like, oh, this is nonsense. I'm just gonna rewrite the whole thing, over the weekend. Like the ego about that, it's just like, get over yourself,
Yeah.
This is fascinating. So I think as we grow in our careers and put on some hat or some little lapel pin that says senior or something like that, maybe we don't say it out loud anymore, but maybe we say it in our heads. But we're a little more cognizant of, okay, so code is written in a time and a place. But can I ask you this question? Okay, so like that's the project you've been assigned. You've got a group of humans you're working with. But what if it's like a library that someone comes along, like you have a vendor library and you're asked to integrate with that? I'm not going to name any names, AWS. And you look at it and you're like, ugh, this doesn't look like any other code I've ever written in this language. And you might think, and it's not just that kind of it looks weird, but like things that look strange. You think, well, if this breaks, I'm on the hook to fix it. Like I integrated this into my code base. I'm taking responsibility for this. Wouldn't it, kind of on balance be safer if I just wrote it myself?
This is against the grain of being a software developer in 2020 when you can just npm install, right? Like you're actually reading through every line of dependency that you're pulling in. So bravo to that, at least. I try to explain to my kids, like, what is it about programming? And I said, well, if you like writing, program isn't really writing, because what you're doing is you're taking other people's paragraphs and you're putting it into your book from all over, right? And so sometimes you like, maybe you're, Peter Bourgeon, to talk about him, he once tweeted out like, my bash is like Hemingway. It's short, it's brief, it's clear. And I'm like, my bash is like Shakespeare, kind of obtuse and Like, I don't know if people understand. Kind of like a tragedy.
Lots of people die in it.
Totally. But that is what you're criticizing, Dave, I think. When you're seeing these libraries, they probably work perfectly well, but they're just not you. They're not your voice. And that's like, so there's a level of, I think, like, acceptance of pulling in, barring like bad, insecure code and monkey patching. Like, that's kind of what I tell my kids you have to live with when you program.
Guilty is charged on all those counts, but the point I was trying to lead to was the one that I closed on in the Zen of Go, which is that maintainability counts. Like Peters wrote readability counts, and I've thought a lot about this over the last couple of years in the writing I've done and the talks that I've done, and in my experiences being a tech lead across a bunch of projects. Like the honest truth is that I've written Go for about 5 or 6 different companies, and I've left all of those companies, which means somebody else has to maintain this code after me. And I have felt anxious about that. Not as like, oh, is someone going to mess up my work? But literally, like, I'm leaving this debt for other people. And if, I've said a couple of times now, if code can't be maintained, either because there isn't, to give an example, the first Go code I wrote at Atlassian was rewritten after I left because I was the only Go programmer. It was reasonable that they rewrote it. But that's not a strategy for the growth of a language. Code that we leave behind as we move between jobs has to be maintainable. It has to be sustainable. And so to summarize the whole thing, like these are as I wrote, these are suggestions for maintainable Go code that other people coming into the project are going to be able to understand and work with, and also code that you'd be happy to work on yourself. In a way, it is trying to find a way of explaining idiomatic Go without saying, don't do this, don't do that. Because idiomatic Go can also be quite positively absolutist in like, always do this, always do that. The real takeaway I want from this is that, like, for the success of our language, for the success of any project, it has to be maintainable, and that exists beyond any one individual.
Yeah, it's important even for yourself. You know, when we write code, we often think, how are we going to feel about this when we've forgotten about it next month and we come back to look at this? How obvious is it going to be then? It's obvious now because we're in the weeds. But once we've lost all that context and we look at this later and we eventually find there's something wrong with it, you know, how do we feel about it? And so when you think like that, like imagine that you're going to forget about this completely and come back in a month. If you think about writing it for that person, for those people instead, I feel like that helps a little bit, rather than when you're in the weeds and you're writing it, everything is very clear because you've just spent hours kind of trying to figure it out. So you've got so much extra information that it's just in RAM. It's going to go. It's not, you know, unless you can capture it somehow, you will lose it. So yeah, it is important to think about that, even for yourself.
I think the top line, like Google C++ group have a style guide. There's a version on the web, and the first item of that is write for the reader, or something of that. Like obviously an idea that has infused in Go, which is that the act of writing is immaterial compared to the cost of reading tens or thousands of times. So write. It's probably like a Kernighan or Strunk and White quote, like write for the reader.
Kyle Simmons and the Economy of Keystrokes, another wonderful talk. He talks about the taxonomy of needs in the JavaScript world, which is, you know, how do we rank the needs? And the needs of the reader trump the needs of the writer, trump the needs of the maintainer, right? And he goes on to explain in that talk, like, some of these idioms that we have, what are they for, right? Is terseness really better if you can't read it? So I really love the ideas coming out of that talk there, very similar to yours, Dave.
To give a shout out to the author of Bitbar here, your ideas of keep to the left, like return early, our patterns of guard clauses and not putting successful code inside the indenter block, it totally speaks for the reader.
Yeah. Yeah, you've talked about glankability before, Matt, and I think this is a different flavor. It's a visual flavor of this very topic.
Yeah, it's that thing. I think you're right. It's just if we think about a database and we're going to write some data and we want to mix it with some other things, we might choose to denormalize that, and that's a bit expensive at write time to do. But if there's so many reads happening on that, then of course it makes sense. So when it's that world, it feels okay, it feels normal. But when it's code, I don't know that we think like that, and maybe we should, because, yeah, like you say, Dave, it gets read. If it's successful, it gets read a lot more times than it was written.
Yeah. The one thing I keep thinking about, though, as Go enters in 2 million people and new people coming in all the time, most of those new people are coming in with previous ideas, previous assumptions, previous idioms, previous culture. And that is the thing when you ask questions like, you show up to a company and do you want to rewrite everything? Or what do you do when you want to try to get to some sort of consensus about culture or idioms or whatnot? And so how does that clash when you either are getting a team to try Go from another language or writing a new service, and it's traditionally been thought of as a Java shop or a Python shop? In the same way that an American is going to maybe make some faux pas in another country, what are the faux pas that you get when you come to Go from other languages?
That's like the $64,000 question.
Yeah.
This is to bring it back to where I think the idea of idiomatic Go, not particularly good teaching tool, is because it's literally saying we don't do that around here. You're unfashionable. It looks weird. And that equally applies to take some examples. As Go was taken off inside Canonical, many Python developers, and almost to a person, the first comment was like, where are my list comprehensions? What is this rubbish? I have to write a for loop like an animal.
Yeah.
But this is just the start of the time. But it's important to note that statement like at that point where this new programmer who's been put on a team, and like, I've been told I can't use Python on this, I have to use this other language, I'm already feeling a little bit anxious, and you're told this is just the way we do things around here. That's the wrong message to send.
Sounds like you're in a Western, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It is very kind of put up or shut up kind of thing. And that's not going to lead to success from anybody. Either people are resentful that I don't have the things that I liked from other language, or they're just confused, or they're embarrassed. There's a whole lot of social pressure involved there of like, I've been put on this team, I don't want to fail. And so I just dislike that whole notion of the way that idiomatic Go is pointing to what other people have done and like tapping the screen and say, make it look like this. It might be a very didactic teaching tool, but it's not very humanistic.
Yeah.
Another one of them on the list that I like is leave concurrency to the caller. You know, this idea that you really want, as a package author, you really do want to deliver this amazing package, and especially if it's doing something and you know that it's going to be used in a concurrent way, you really do want it's almost the fun bit, isn't it? It's the fun bit sometimes of the package, and you have to maybe give that up for the sake of simplicity. What are the other benefits of leaving concurrency to the caller? Why is that important? To give
credit, this is another one of Peter Bergon's fantastic observations. I'm probably forgetting other people who've contributed to this debate, but you're absolutely right that it is, if you're like, I'm writing like a find function or a search function, like I can bring all the power of the computer to bear on this. I'm just going to start a few Go routines. We're going to do this in parallel. And that's great. And you're like, that's the fun bit. I get to write the fun bit. I don't have to do the like API call, blah, 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 write the documentation. I get to do the fun bit. But the difficulty with that, and I'll give a link for the show notes, is Peter talked about, I think he had a presentation, GoFest, the one that happens in San Francisco, called The Way I Do Things, which is about his experiences running Go. And one of them was this idea of, it all comes down to not losing track of that Go routine you started. Part of it is like the very kind of dogmatic way I put it of, make sure you know how that's going to, if you start that Go routine, make sure you know where it's going to finish. Like, it's probably not one of the better ones on that list. But Peter's observation of that there needs to be some high level concept of keeping track of that Go routine. If that Go routine is one that is started and holds resources, you need to know when it stopped, because you might need those resources back. Like, say, how many times have you fought with tests that flaky because they're hitting kind of little residual parts of the previous test case that haven't quite shut down yet? That's the fundamental problem of concurrency. It's not that we can start and use it very effectively. It's that we have to know when it's all shut down and finished. Because if you want to do it again, you can't run over yourself with the previous instance. So to bring it back to leaving concurrency to the caller, one of the best ways to do that is, unfortunately for the author, is to give up the responsibility of who's going to start that Go routine to the caller, to somebody else, to provide them hooks. The easiest way to provide a hook for someone to run your function concurrently is just write a function. They can put in a Go routine if they want. So some of the ideas that Peter has are these more complex notions of when we have kind of like workers. You think of the workers that collectively represent providing a service, like an indexer and a searcher and a thing that accepts connections, that kind of all conceptually live together as a group. You need a way of managing them as a group. So like GoKit's run package, there's some good ideas in there.
I was going to say, yeah, one of the other things, if you do the concurrency inside your package, it's in Go, it's very easy to make something concurrent. It's not very easy to do the other way around, to take concurrent code and synchronize it, especially if it's running inside some package and there's other channels and things that exist that you don't have any access to. So that's another good point that people should remember is it's easy for people to make their own concurrency and then they know what's going on. They're responsible for it. It is just a shame. But I tell you one trick, and I've actually had this very recently. One trick is to write a little example that does it. You still get to do it. You get to prove it. You still get to see it working. You get the fun bit, if that is the fun bit for you. But it doesn't have to be part of the package API. It could be an example that ships alongside the project.
I think the testable examples that we have that just fall out of Go test are kind of one of Go's undiscovered gems. There should be an example for every single API function. There isn't because basically the documentation, but like the power that they give to someone reading GoDoc, there's literally a piece of sample code that isn't just from a code comment. It's tested. It works with the example that you're seeing right there on the screen. It was such a straightforward thing, such a simple thing, but incredibly powerful. I can't think of another language like in the contemporaries that kind of has that baked in, just like not just in the documentation, but the integration through the testing package and through the way that they're highlighted in GoDoc is just a hidden gem.
Hi there, this is John Calhoun, one of your GoTime panelists. When I'm not working on GoTime, I create programming courses that help developers level up their Go skills. And one of my more recent courses, Algorithms with Go, is live, and I wanted to invite you to check it out. So it's completely free, and in it we explore how algorithms and data structures work, as well as how to actually implement them in Go code. So if you've ever had an interest in learning about algorithms or data structures, or if you felt like you understand them conceptually but just couldn't nail down that coding part, this course is going to be great for you. We actually dive into coding everything, we work on practice problems, and it's a lot of fun. You can sign up completely free at algorithmswithgo.com/GoTime. Again, that's algorithmswithgo.com/GoTime. And don't forget that last /GoTime bit. It helps me keep track of how you found out about the course so that GoTime gets credit for referring you. Thanks for listening.
I would like to touch on the bit where if you think something is slow, right, prove it with a benchmark. That's actually one of my favorite features in the language, that you don't have to, bring in third-party tooling or anything like that to test the efficiency of your code. It's built into the language, right? So if it's built into the test framework. So if you think something is slow, right, don't just eyeball it, right? Actually write the benchmarks, right, to actually prove it and then do the work, right? And to that point, I think there's this sort of early on when I first started doing Go, there was this sort of constant buzz around the community about, Go is fast, but you have to know how to use Go routines, you have to know how to program it just right. Like there was this constant sort of a murmur of like focus on pure performance. If this thing wasn't doing zero allocation, speedy, this was a time when we were coming out with an HTTP router every other week, this was a time, maybe this was a period where we as a community had to sort of mature a little bit, get to know the language and sort of grow as developers. But this whole notion that, if it's not fast by some arbitrary measure, right, then you need to go back to the drawing board kind of thing. So yes, please do touch on that, because to me, Go already solves like a vast majority of the problems I have from a speed standpoint. Very rarely do I have to actually try to optimize just one part of one area of my code. Maybe that's just me, but I don't find myself constantly having to worry about optimizing my Go code.
Yeah, so if you think it's slow point, cards on the table, that was a little bit of my opinion. Doing this occasional workshop on performance, there is, like, I come head first into that. Is this the fastest it could possibly be mentality? And unsurprisingly, I have opinions about that. The two things which I think are important in this discussion is that there is a continuum between readability, between maintainability and performance. Does everyone agree that to make the fastest possible code, sometimes the readability, the maintainability of the code has to suffer? And if the fundamental goal of this work is maintainability is the most important thing, then when you make that decision to de-optimize the readability of a code for performance, optimize performance by making it harder, more subtle, harder to maintain. And it doesn't necessarily need to be even like, that code looks like crap on the page. It can be, this has very subtle invariants, like that can't ever be nil, or that can only be set once, or like very, very, very fragile things which hurt more than just the readability, the maintainability. Because people are like, that code is very sensitive. There are some examples in the standard library where a function is split into two, so that the simple case, which is usually is inlineable, but the exceptional case is not. Very, very subtle code that, like, if there wasn't a comment saying don't move that line because literally it affects performance, you would never know. So the other point I'm speaking to is dogma. Defer is slow. Always use atomics, never using mutex. Those absolutist statements which drive that kind of thinking. So how do we know when is the right time to invest in more subtle, harder to maintain code? Use the benchmarking tools that Go comes with. Don't optimize for, I'll give an example. In Go 1.14, a deferred mutex unlock is almost as fast as a non-deferred version. When I say almost, on my machine, it was like 0.7 of a nanosecond slower. So in the absolutist view, you can say, oh, look, that's still slower. But the point is, that's an uncontended mutex. That's literally one Go routine, taking the lock and putting it back. Once you have that atomic actually contended, it's the cache lines moving between CPUs. I can tell you that 0.7 of a nanosecond is not going to count.
You're right. It's a good point as well, because as soon as you have a few things in your program interacting, then things get very unpredictable very quickly. Way too quickly, in my opinion, but physics, I suppose. Yeah, that's another reason to prove it, isn't it? That's why you sort of say prove it, because actually you might be wrong, and you might be really surprised by how your system or your code actually runs in the wild, or even just at some kind of realistic scale.
Yeah. And the one thing that I would say in terms of idiomatic Go is that you have to know when to also break the rules. And that's hard too, especially when you're a beginner. And when you talk about dogma, you can't have that when each release is fixing previous problems that you were dogmatic about. So defers is the perfect example with 1.14. Yeah.
It's actually, it's stressful as a beginner who's learning the language, right? Whether because you have to for work or out of desire to, learn something new, learn the new language. It's frustrating to always be sort of second guessing yourself. Am I doing this right? Am I doing this in the idiomatic way, right? Or is somebody more experienced than me going to look at this code and tell me that the very thing that, that Dave is sort of advocating, again, before, basically don't say, hey, we don't do things like this around here, right? So it's stressful, right? So to anybody out there who's learning Go, don't worry about whether it's idiomatic or not. Just learn, play, right? Like, fine, let somebody come in. Hopefully somebody will sort of say, hey, there's a better way to do this, and they'll do it in sort of the nicer way rather than just saying, hey, this is not idiomatic, and move on. But like, even if you have those detractors, that's okay. Just, there's no shortage of detractors, right? Just focus on actually just playing and learning. And the idiomatic part, that's just going to come. Like, I didn't come to a threshold, right, in my Go journey where, I just walked through. I'm like, oh yeah, now I'm writing idiomatic Go. That's not an event. Yeah. It just right? There's no marker, there's no milestone there. Like, your code increasingly just becomes, what we, subjectively can call idiomatic, but there's no sort of official threshold. So just play, just learn.
Yeah. My sister is a university Spanish professor, so she teaches language, just not a computer one. And she's done it for over 2 decades now. And she can pretty much predict who's going to learn Spanish and who's not by who's willing to get messy within the first week. because learning is messy. So what you just said, Johnny, is exactly that. Just get messy. Do it wrong.
Sacre bleu.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
There you go. Just like, yeah.
One thing I think about the use of idiomatic Go is that, like, initially it starts with well-meaning of like, hey, you're new here. Let me show you around. Let me show you the road. Let me show you where the coffee machine is. But at some point, it can also become gatekeeping. We only do it this way. We're not going to change. And that's another important thing to realize, that in any healthy community, like, in languages, the spoken languages and the use of computing languages evolves. That's like, think of meme speak. Like 20 years ago, no one said lol. That's a word that we just invented, and it changes discourse. So the last kind of, like, to put the final nail in the idiomatic Go coffin is that the last thing I want is for it to be gatekeeping. We've always done it like this. It should be totally right to question, quick question, why do we always do it like this? Because we've always done it like that can never be an answer in a sustainable community.
Well said. I think that's a really nice summarization of the show, actually. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think looking at my watch, it's time for our regular slot for popular opinion.
Wow, you butchered that one, huh?
Unpopular opinion.
I actually think you should probably leave.
Unpopular opinion. So, does anyone have an unpopular opinion? It can't be about my timing this time. Dave, have you got one, please?
Do I have an unpopular opinion? Well, I've given you 11.
Well, according to the Hacker News, you have. Oh, what a fun bunch. Oh.
Doesn't have to be about Go. It could be about anything. Yeah, about anything. Here's your moment.
So think about your day. Like, think about the things that you've done in the day, and think about the things that have interrupted you during that day. Think about the things that have interrupted your focus. I mean, a lot of them are probably unavoidable, like my dog just came downstairs, or like your family, or there might be someone at the door. But the thing that occurs to me is that many of these interruptions are actually self-inflicted. Mobile phone notifications, pop-ups, chat messages, the inevitable clamor of Slack. All of these things interrupt your focus. And the thing that it seems to me is that as knowledge workers, we have 3 skills. And in order of that, the first one is our experience, like the experience that we bring to our task. The second one is your ability to communicate. And the third one is your ability to focus. And like, these are like in order of kind of difficulty and priority. Like experience, we can all just Google things. There are people you can talk to, you can get experience. Your ability to communicate kind of gates that. How well can you communicate? How well can you ask questions? How well can you formulate your thoughts? How well can you convince other people to do things? But I think the most important one, and the one that I struggle with the most, is focus. Think of all the things that, like, oh, I'm just going to, like, throughout my day, I'm just going to run that command. I'm just going to pick up my phone and have a look at Twitter. I've deliberately let myself be interrupted. And as a group of knowledge workers, and maybe this applies to everyone, like, your focus is your superpower. If you can't focus on anything, you can't get anything done.
That's a great one, actually. I don't think that's going to be unpopular. I thought you were going to go on to say so now you're selling Dave Cheney straitjackets for developers.
No, I think the unpopular thing is that there's a lot of things in this world which compete for attention. Like no matter how much money you have in the world, you can't invent a 25th hour in the day. So your attention is a commodity which is constantly being competed with. And there are a lot of things that I think in the modern workplace actually are quite negative towards that, like being always available via notifications and Slack and chat and things like that. It's not to say that chat is not fine or that group chat is not fine, but can you honestly say, like to the radio audience here, can you honestly say that if you turned off your chat notifications for a day, you wouldn't either A, feel guilty that you were ignoring your coworkers, or B, feel a little bit worried that your boss thought you were slacking off?
Yeah.
Yet, how are we as programmers supposed to work if we cannot create any space to focus in?
Yeah, this really speaks volumes to me, Dave. And actually, I'm working on a new project that kind of is founded on those exact principles. And I think it's dead right. You wouldn't, if there was a room with 100 developers working in there, you wouldn't walk in and just shout "here" really loud, would you?
Yeah, right.
Do you know what I mean? And yet
Ampersand here.
yeah, and that's what is happening, isn't it? Like on Slack, and it is a cultural thing too. You do, because it's instant messaging. You expect that instant reply.
Yeah, if you don't reply right away, why didn't you?
Yeah, and you do feel like you're letting people down, and then of course, so then you do react immediately to get it out of the way, so you can get back to focusing, and then you've just sort of rewarded that behavior and reinforced it a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'll ask anybody to just, in their day-to-day work, just be cognizant of, if you use Slack or Discord or IRC or in any chat system, this is not against any one of them, but do you reflexively Alt-Tab over to just check the window? Just check to see if there are any, if there's anything you should respond to.
Guilty.
Because you're actively destroying your ability to focus. And that's kind of like if there's one thing that's going to determine who is more successful, two individuals who is going to be more successful fundamentally, it is their ability to focus. Because that will preclude them from being effective enough as a communicator to reach out and get assistance from everybody. That will preclude them from being able to do any serious deep thinking, because they're constantly either being interrupted by their circumstance or just have trained themselves to interrupt themselves. And so this was the challenge that I set for myself late last year. Anytime that I will reflexively think to pick up my phone to check my phone, I'll pick up a book. So I always have a book with me, and I try and read a page. I love reading Twitter when I get up. I love catching up with the world, just like I read the news over breakfast. But I realize just how easy it is for myself to get distracted by it. It's just an Alt-Tab away, or it's just literally sitting next to me, because we have to have these damn things next to us for our 2FA tokens. I can't leave this downstairs, otherwise I can't log in and do work.
Or if you're an on-call rotation, right? Like you're just,
So just think about how the circumstances have conspired to actively keep you in a state of always being interruptible, and how that fights against your ability to focus. I think Nate Finch had a tweet a long time ago, ironically a tweet saying, "Well, where are we supposed to focus in open plan offices?" There's my unpopular opinion.
That's another Danto Infernes hell. Open plan offices are the real Dante's Inferno.
So all this interruption, we should note that you are excused from everything that we've just said about interruptions when you do join the GoTime FM Slack channel to participate and willingly choose to be interrupted with our fun discussions. Yeah. So please do keep doing that. Yes.
Well said.
Yes, but I fear our time has come to an end today. But Dave, thank you so much. Anyone interested, check out the show notes. No, absolutely. It was a pleasure as always.
Indeed.
Yeah, there's been some people someone said in the Slack channel, "What's this Aussie talking about?" That's Barnaby said that. So that's nice, isn't it?
Take it up with them.
I barely know myself.
Yeah, but no, it's been great, and I think that is a lovely lesson as well that we should take away from this, which is if you do find yourself about to say something's not idiomatic, think instead about why we think that's idiomatic. Like, what are the positives? What are the pros for that? Talk about those ideas instead, and be open to people challenging that. I love that idea. I think we should all actually spend a bit of time thinking about that.
Let me leave everybody with a challenge. This was the challenge that I set myself. I became tech lead of this project that I've been working on at VMware for a while. As has happened in many jobs, as I've kind of been hired as like the only Go programmer that they can find, I'm kind of seen as like the expert. But I set myself, as tech lead, you're expected to review a lot of code, give guidance, things like that. But the rule I set for myself is that I was never allowed to use this, just do it because, do it this way because, do it this way because, I know better. Trust the experts, trust your father, like trust your betters, like you'll understand. I said to myself, I was never allowed to use that excuse. And so in a way, many of the things that I've been writing and working and thinking on are trying to, well, if I can't use, just do it this way because trust me, as an excuse, I have to be able to justify everything that I'm saying. Like, thank you for this code review. I have some concerns about this API because of this second parameter. It doesn't seem to be used all the time, and that means it's confusing for someone for a newcomer. Like, those are statements you have to say what you make when you don't let yourself say, just do it this way, trust me, do it this way, you're wrong, effectively. So the challenge I leave to everybody is to, when you're having the discourse with other people, when you're giving feedback on code review, if you find yourself saying, especially if you feel you're frustrated, like, oh, we've had this discussion hundreds of times, why can't you just do it the way that I said? Maybe it's because you haven't justified it. You haven't actually justified it. Like, you're leaning on your own history rather than having the open discussion about, rather than saying do or don't, say, I think it would be better if, and those kind of statements. And so, taking Scott Meyer's words to heart, never have those absolutes of, say things like, prefer this, in general prefer, or when you do make an exception, you talk about it. So that's a challenge I leave to everybody. Think about when you're talking about code with your coworkers, don't just say, do it because. Say, I think that this would be better, and these are my reasons. Because it is fundamentally your opinion at the end of the day. But instead of making it kind of absolutist, you say, here are my suggestions. Do you agree?
Well, challenge accepted, and I hope our other listeners do too. Dave, thank you so much. Please come back. And for everyone else, we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Go Time. We appreciate you hanging out with us. Thanks again to Dave Cheney for joining the show. You can find links to the Zen of Go and Dave's other endeavors in the show notes at changelog.com/gotime/122. This episode was hosted by Matt Ryer with Carmen Ando and Johnny Borsico. It was produced by Jared Santo, hey that's me, with music provided by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Thanks to our awesome sponsors for supporting the show. Fastly, Linode, and Rollbar have our back. If you and your organization would benefit from speaking directly into the ear holes of all the gophers out there, consider sponsoring Go Time. Podcast advertising is very effective, especially when you know you're talking directly to your tribe. Plus, you get that warm and fuzzy feeling of supporting something you love. Head to changelog.com/sponsor to learn more. We'd love to work with you. That's all for this week. We'll talk to you next time.
Hello. That's a bad start. So sometimes, kids, things don't go to plan. And that was one of those, just a little cough at the exact wrong time. But don't worry, through the power of editing, this will definitely make it into the end thing.
Yep, it's definitely staying in, yeah.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah. This is going to be like a DVD extra for some reason. You have to find, we don't have many moments to use, but little things like this. Someone coughs, that's gold. Get that on the DVD extra straight on. Okay, I'll do it again.
Dad, what's a DVD extra?
Oh, yeah.
What's a DVD?
Dad, what's a DVD?
Okay. Oh yeah, I forgot the world's moved on.